Lance was 39 years old and made $58,240 a year assembling Ford F-150s at the Clay Como plant just outside Kansas City. At 9:14 p.m. on a Tuesday night in October, under the harsh glare of the 89er track lighting in their kitchen, that precise salary became the weapon his wife used to end their 5-year marriage. The air in their modest Brookside home, a 1,400-square-foot bungalow they'd bought for $320,000, was thick with a silence that felt heavier than sound. Nyla stood across the polished granite island, a $4,500 upgrade she'd insisted on 2 years prior. She was wearing a silk lounge set that cost $300, her expression one of profound, weary disappointment. On the counter between them sat the mail, including a glossy brochure for a new condominium development on the Country Club Plaza, a place where units started at $800,000. "I can't do this anymore, Lance," Nyla said, her voice a low, controlled tremor. She slid the brochure toward him. "This is a life, what we have. This is just getting by." Lance looked from the brochure to his wife. Her luminous, deep brown skin seemed to absorb the light, leaving her features in sharp, unforgiving relief. Her hair was styled in elegant, intricate braids that had cost $400 at a salon on 18th and Vine. He was still in his work clothes, steel-toed boots caked with factory grime, a simple pair of Dickies that cost $35, and a union t-shirt. He smelled of machine oil and honest labor. "We have a good life, Nyla," he said, his voice quiet. "We have this house. We have each other." She let out a short, bitter laugh that wasn't a laugh at all. It was the sound of a lock breaking. "This house? This house is a starter home we never left. And each other? I want a partner, not an anchor. I want to go to Europe, not the Ozarks, for a long weekend in a rented cabin that costs $200 a night. I want to sit on boards, to attend galas in a $5,000 dress, not go to the union potluck." Every word was a carefully aimed dart, and they all found their mark. He felt the familiar, dull ache of her disapproval, an ache that had become the background music of their marriage. He had no idea what was coming next, how final this night would be. "I work hard," he said, the words feeling useless even as he spoke them. "You work with your hands," she corrected, her tone dripping with a condescension she no longer bothered to hide. "You clock in, you clock out. There's no ambition, no vision. Your biggest dream is paying off the mortgage 10 years early." He looked down at his hands. They were calloused and strong, the hands of a man who built things. They had fixed the leaky faucet under this very sink, built the bookshelves in the living room from $80 worth of raw pine, and held her when her mother, her beloved mama, passed away 2 years ago. Now she spoke about them as if they were a source of shame. "There is nothing wrong with that," he said softly. "There's nothing enough with that," she snapped, her control finally cracking. Her voice rose, sharp and clear. "Don't you get it? After all this time, don't you see? I have needs, I have goals. And you?" She paused, her eyes sweeping over him, from his worn boots to his tired face, and delivered the final devastating blow. "You'll never be enough." The words hung in the air, absolute and irreversible. He felt them settle deep in his bones, a cold, heavy truth. Not that he wasn't enough, but that he would never be enough for her. The distinction was critical. He said nothing. There was nothing left to say. Nyla took his silence as agreement. Her expression hardened into one of grim resolution. She picked up her iPhone 14 Pro, a $1,200 device, and her thumb moved across the screen with practiced efficiency. She turned it so he could see the contact she had pulled up. Eleanor Vance, Eskiers. "I'm calling my lawyer," she said, her voice now devoid of all emotion. It was the voice of a business transaction. "She'll have papers drawn up. I want the house half of your 401k, and spousal support. Given my contributions to this marriage, the career I put on hold for you, I think that's more than fair." Lance watched her, his face a mask of stillness. He heard the faint sound of the phone ringing on the other end, the first chime in a sequence that would shatter the life he thought he had. But beneath the shock, something else was stirring. A quiet, deep, and unshakable calm. He had known this day might come. He had, in his own methodical way, been preparing for it for 18 years. Nyla was about to make a series of assumptions, all of them based on the $58,240 he earned at the Ford plant. She had made a critical, life-altering mistake. She had no idea who she was divorcing. Have you ever been completely underestimated by someone who was supposed to know you best? Tell us about it in the comments. We read every single one. Their life together had been a carefully constructed facade, a stage play where Lance knew his lines. But Nyla believed the props were real. He remembered the day they bought their dining room table. It was a solid oak set from a local furniture store in the River Market, costing $200. Lance had been proud of it. It was sturdy, well-made, a place where they could build memories. The day it was delivered at 3:30 p.m. on a Saturday, Nyla had walked around it, her fingers tracing the wood grain with a look of thinly veiled disappointment. She was dressed for a brunch she'd just returned from at a chic restaurant on the plaza, wearing a Diane von Furstenberg wrap dress that cost $600 and holding a $1,800 Chloe handbag. "It's sturdy," she had said, the word landing with a thud. "My friend Jessica just got a custom-made table from Italy. It cost $12,000. You can see the difference in the craftsmanship." Lance had simply nodded, arranging the 6 matching chairs. "This will last us a lifetime," he'd replied, his voice even. What he didn't say was that he had just closed on a 4-plex in the historic Northeast neighborhood for $220,000, a deal funded entirely by the profits from 2 other properties he owned. The income from that building alone would pay for Jessica's Italian table in less than 6 months. But that was his world, not theirs. Their joint account, the one Nyla had access to, was where his bi-weekly paycheck of $1,680 was deposited. It was from this account that they paid the $1,850 mortgage, the utility bills, the $600 monthly car payment for her Lexus RX 350, a $65,000 vehicle she'd called a necessity. It was from this account that she drew funds for her $300 salon visits, her shopping sprees that often topped $1,000 a month, and the organic groceries from Whole Foods that cost twice as much as the produce at the local price chopper. Lance's expenses were minimal. He drove a 2010 Ford F-150 with a 192,051 miles on it, a truck he'd paid cash for years before they met. He packed his own lunch for work every day, a simple turkey sandwich and an apple, saving at least $15 a day over buying food from the plant's vending machines. His watch was an $89 Timex, reliable and unassuming. His splurges were contributions to his 401k and the occasional purchase of a new tool for his garage workshop, like the $250 DeWalt drill he'd bought last Christmas. Nyla saw this as a lack of taste, a failure of ambition. She couldn't understand why he wouldn't lease a new truck or buy a more expensive watch. One evening, at 6:47 p.m., they were getting ready for a dinner party at the home of one of her colleagues. The colleague's husband was a partner at a downtown law firm, and they lived in a 4,000-square-foot home in Mission Hills worth $1.5 million. Nyla stood before the full-length mirror in their bedroom, adjusting the fit of a stunning cobalt blue Tadashi shoji gown that had set them back $950. "Can you please not wear that jacket?" she asked, her eyes finding his reflection in the mirror. He was putting on a simple, clean navy blazer from Kohl's that he'd owned for 6 years. It had cost $120. "What's wrong with it?" Lance asked. "It just looks cheap, Lance." Robert will be wearing a custom-tailored suit that probably costs more than our first car. Everyone there will be of a certain caliber. I just don't want us to look out of place." He felt a familiar sting. "Us or you?" he asked, his voice gentle. She turned to face him, her expression a mixture of frustration and pity. "It reflects on me," she said, as if that explained everything. "It's embarrassing." He didn't argue. He went to the closet and put on a different blazer, one she had picked out for him at Nordstrom a year ago. It had cost $450 and felt identical to the other one, but the label inside satisfied her. As he put it on, he thought about the email he'd received that morning from his property manager. A commercial tenant in a small retail strip he owned near the university had just signed a 5-year lease renewal, a deal worth over $300,000 in gross revenue. The commission he paid the agent was more than the cost of Robert's custom suit, but in their bedroom, under Nyla's critical gaze, he was just a man in a cheap jacket. This was the life he had chosen to live with her, a life of deliberate, quiet underestimation. He thought it would protect what he was building. He had no idea how wrong he was. The cruelty escalated slowly, then all at once. It shifted from subtle slights to open contempt. The accumulation of these moments was like 1,000 tiny cuts, each one a reminder of her profound disappointment in him. One of the worst moments happened at a public event, a fundraiser for a local arts organization that Nyla had insisted they attend. The tickets were $500 each, paid for from their joint account. The event was held at the Nelson Atkins Museum of Art, in the grand, luminous Bloch building. The space was filled with Kansas City's elite, bankers in $8,000 Brioni suits, surgeons, and their wives, adorned in jewelry that cost more than Lance's annual salary. Lance, in his $450 Nordstrom blazer, felt like an observer from another world. He was standing near the bar, holding a glass of sparkling water, when Nyla approached with a couple he didn't know. The man was tall, with silver hair and an air of effortless authority. His name was Arthur. "Arthur, this is my husband, Lance," Nyla said, her voice bright and social. Arthur shook his hand firmly. "A pleasure. And what do you do, Lance?" Before Lance could answer, Nyla jumped in, her hand resting lightly on his arm in a gesture that looked like affection, but felt like a restraint. "Lance works for Ford," she said, her smile tight. "He helps build the F-150, a very important job." There was an art to the way she said it. The slight emphasis on helps, the over-the-top praise of it being important. It was a verbal pat on the head, a way of framing his profession as something quaint and blue-collar before anyone could mistake him for being in their league. It was a preemptive apology for his existence in this space. Arthur nodded politely, his eyes already scanning the room for someone more interesting. "Ah, the backbone of America. Good on you." The conversation quickly moved on, but Lance felt the heat of humiliation crawl up his neck. He saw the pity in the other woman's eyes. He was Nyla's folksy, working-class husband, a prop she used to appear grounded while simultaneously signaling her own aspirations for something better. Later that night, as they drove home in her silent, leather-scented Lexus, the tension was a physical presence in the car. "You didn't have to say it like that," Lance said, breaking the silence as they turned onto their quiet street in Brookside. "Like what?" Nyla asked, feigning innocence. "I was proud. I told them what you do." "You know what I mean," he said. "You framed it. You made me sound like a child you were presenting at show and tell." She sighed, a long, exasperated sound. "Oh, Lance, don't be so sensitive. What was I supposed to say? My husband is an assembly line worker? It sounds so common. I was trying to help you." "I don't need your help," he said, his voice flat. My work isn't something to be ashamed of or dressed up in fancy language. Well, maybe you should be, she shot back, her voice suddenly sharp as glass. Maybe if you were a little ashamed, you'd have the motivation to do something more with your life. Did you see the men in that room? They run this city. And what did you do today? You put a steering wheel on a pickup truck? 150 times, is that really all you want? The car pulled into their driveway at 11:22 p.m. The engine cut off, and they were plunged into darkness and silence. He felt a profound sense of loneliness. He was sitting next to the woman he had married, and he had never felt more alone. He was building an empire, brick by silent brick, and she was mourning the fact that he wasn't a mid-level bank manager. The final betrayal, before the divorce papers, was a conversation he overheard. He had come home early from his shift at 2:45 p.m. because the line had a mechanical failure. He walked in the back door to hear Nyla on the phone in the living room, her voice animated. "I know, Jessica, I know, it's just exhausting. I feel like I'm living a double life. I have to pretend to be satisfied with this incredibly small existence." A pause. No, he has no idea. He thinks paying off the mortgage is the height of financial success. It's adorable, in a pathetic sort of way. Lance stood frozen in the kitchen, his lunchbox, a $10 metal container, still in his hand. "A divorce?" Nyla's voice dropped. "I've thought about it. My lawyer says I'd get the house and half his pension. It's not a fortune, probably a few $100,000, but it would be a start. It would be my seed money to finally get out and build a real life. At least I wouldn't have to spend my evenings watching him clean grease from under his fingernails." The casual cruelty of it stole his breath. Seed money. His life's work, the part of it she knew about, was her escape plan. The image of him cleaning his hands, something he did every single day before he would even touch anything in their home, was a symbol of her disgust. He backed out of the door silently, his heart a cold, hard knot in his chest. He sat in his old F-150 for nearly an hour, the engine off, just breathing. The street was quiet. The sun was shining. His world had just been irrevocably broken. He knew then that it was over. All that remained was for her to make the first move. He wouldn't have to wait long. 2 weeks later, at 10:15 a.m., during his morning break at the plant, a man in a cheap suit approached him on the factory floor. Amidst the deafening roar of machinery and the hiss of pneumatic wrenches, he was served with divorce papers. His co-workers stared, their curiosity piqued. It was the public humiliation she had always craved, a final, definitive statement that he was not and would never be on her level. The papers felt thin and insignificant in his hands, but their weight was immense. He read the petition in the break room, the smell of stale coffee and microwave popcorn thick in the air, irreconcilable differences. The legal language was cold, but Nyla's demands were crystal clear. She wanted the house, its estimated $320,000 value her primary target. She wanted half of his 401k, which had a current balance of $88,450. And she was petitioning for 5 years of spousal support, citing her sacrificed career potential to support his modest but stable employment. Her lawyer had estimated the total marital estate at approximately $410,000. Her goal was to walk away with over $250,000. That evening, he called her. He let his voice sound tired, defeated. He played the part she had written for him. "I got the papers, Nyla," he said, sitting on the edge of their bed, the bed they would no longer share. "I know," she replied, her tone businesslike. "I told you this was happening, Lance. It's better to be efficient about it." "The house? You want the house?" he asked, as if the thought were devastating. "It's the only real asset we have," she said matter-of-factly. "I need a place to live, and my name is on the deed. It makes the most sense. You can find a small apartment near the plant. It's probably more your style anyway." The casual cruelty was breathtaking. He took a slow breath, keeping his voice steady. Okay, Nyla. I don't want to fight you. If this is what you really want, it is, she said, a note of relief in her voice. He was making it easy for her. The simple, uncomplicated man was being simple and uncomplicated in his own destruction. My lawyer, Eleanor, will handle everything. She'll be in touch with whoever you hire. Just don't hire some cheap local guy, Lance. It will just drag things out. I'll find someone, he said. I guess we have to talk about dividing our things. There isn't much to divide, she said with a dismissive sigh. I'll take the good furniture, the art. You can have your tools and that old leather chair you love so much. That chair, a comfortable, worn recliner, had cost him $400 12 years ago. The art she referred to were 3 prints from West Elm that cost $250 each. He let the silence hang for a moment. All right, Nyla. I'll be in touch. He hung up the phone and felt a profound sense of clarity. The grief was real, but it was overshadowed by a cold, methodical resolve. She saw him as an obstacle to be managed, a small-town problem to be solved on her way to a bigger life. She had no idea she was playing checkers while he had been setting up a chessboard for nearly 2 decades. The next day he made a phone call, not to a local divorce attorney in a strip mall, but to Deidre Vance, a partner at one of the most respected law firms in Kansas City. Her office was in a sleek glass tower on Main Street, with panoramic views of the city Nyla so desperately wanted to conquer. Deidre's reputation was legendary. She was known for her forensic approach to complex financial cases. Her hourly rate was $750. He arrived for his appointment at 1 p.m. the following Monday, carrying a worn leather briefcase that had belonged to his grandfather. Inside were not legal documents, but 8 identical black notebooks. They were simple moleskin journals, costing $22 each. Deidre Vance was a sharp, impeccably dressed black woman in her early 50s. Her office was minimalist and modern, dominated by a massive glass desk. She listened patiently, her expression neutral, as Lance explained his situation, his salary, and Nyla's demands. He could see the familiar calculation in her eyes, the mental categorization of this as a straightforward, low-asset divorce. She's asking for the house, half the 401k, and support, Deidre summarized, her pen poised over a legal pad. It's a standard opening position. We can likely negotiate the spousal support down, perhaps offer her a larger share of the house equity in exchange. Lance simply nodded. Then he opened the briefcase and placed the 8 journals on her desk. Before we discuss strategy, he said, I need you to see these. Deidre looked at the journals, a flicker of curiosity in her eyes. What are they? My life, Lance said. The one my wife knows nothing about. He opened the first journal, dated January 2004. He was 21 years old. The entry, in neat block handwriting, detailed his grandfather's inheritance, $75,000. The next entry detailed the purchase of his first property, a small duplex in the Strawberry Hill neighborhood of Kansas City, Kansas, for $78,000. He had used the inheritance as a down payment and secured a small loan for the rest. He walked her through the pages, year by year. Each journal was a meticulous record. Every rent check received, every repair made, every dollar of profit was documented. He showed her the entry from 2006, when he used the profits from the duplex to purchase a second property, a rundown single-family home he renovated himself on weekends. He showed her the bank statements he had kept, separate accounts that Nyla never knew existed, where the rental income was deposited. He showed her the paperwork for his first LLC, Lancer Properties, formed in 2008, 2 years before he even met Nyla. He opened another journal, 2012. He showed her the sale of the first two properties and the 1031 exchange he executed to purchase a small apartment building for $650,000. He explained how he had taught himself real estate law, tax codes, and asset management by reading books from the public library and watching free seminars online. As he continued laying out a timeline of acquisitions, sales, and leveraged investments, Deidre Vance's expression shifted from polite interest to focused intensity, and finally, to something approaching awe. She stopped taking notes on her legal pad and began to study the journals themselves, her sharp legal mind processing the sheer volume and quality of his documentation. He showed her the last acquisition, made just 6 months before Nyla filed for divorce, a commercial retail space on a prime corner in Overland Park, purchased for $2.2 million. The entire portfolio was held by a series of LLCs, all owned by a master holding company that was, in turn, owned solely by him. Every single asset, every dollar of profit, was meticulously firewalled from the W-2 income he earned at the Ford plant. That $58,240 was the only money that had ever touched their shared life. When he was finished, he closed the last journal. The silence in the room was profound. Deidre Vance leaned back in her expensive ergonomic chair, a $2,000 Herman Miller Aeron. She looked at Lance, truly looked at him, for the first time. She didn't see a factory worker. She saw a quiet genius, a master of a long, patient game. "Mr. Jackson," she said, her voice holding a new note of deep respect, "your wife has made a terrible, terrible miscalculation." She picked up her pen again. "Let's prepare your financial disclosure. I believe this will be a very short negotiation." What do you think Nyla's reaction will be when she sees the truth? We're dying to know your predictions in the comments below. The days leading up to the first settlement hearing were a masterclass in strategic restraint. Lance went about his life as the man Nyla believed him to be. He moved out of the Brookside house and into a small, furnished, one-bedroom apartment he rented for $950 a month in the Northland, closer to the plant. He packed his few belongings, his clothes, his tools, the old leather recliner, and a box of books, in his F-150 and made the move in a single afternoon. Nyla, still living in the house, interpreted this as a sign of his weakness and quick capitulation. She sent him a text message at 8:12 p.m. the day he moved out. "Good. This is for the best. Makes things cleaner. Have your lawyer send over your new address." He replied simply, "Will do." Her lawyer, Eleanor, sent a flurry of aggressive emails to Deidre Vance. They were filled with condescending language, referring to Lance's limited financial literacy and the need for a simple, straightforward division of assets to avoid unnecessary legal costs for your client. Deidre's replies were consistently brief, polite, and non-committal. "We will present our client's full financial disclosure at the preliminary hearing as required by state law." This calm refusal to engage further agitated Nyla and her counsel. They saw it as a stalling tactic from a small-time lawyer who was out of her depth. Nyla complained to Lance during a brief, tense phone call about swapping car titles. "Your lawyer is being difficult," she'd said, her voice sharp with annoyance. "Eleanor says she's just stonewalling. Look, Lance, I don't want to drag this out and run up a huge legal bill. Just agree to my initial offer. It's more than fair, and we can both move on." "I'm just doing what my lawyer tells me to do, Nyla," he said, his voice a perfect imitation of a man being led by forces beyond his control. "She said we have to follow the process." "The process," Nyla scoffed. "The process is for people with complicated assets. We have a house and a 401k. It's not that hard. Just tell her to accept the offer." "I'll talk to her," he lied, knowing Deidre had already prepared a document that was the financial equivalent of a nuclear bomb. The day of the hearing arrived. It was a gray, overcast Wednesday morning. the sky threatening a cold November rain. The hearing was scheduled for 10 a.m. in a conference room at a neutral mediation firm downtown. Lance chose his clothes carefully. He didn't wear a suit. He wore a pair of clean khaki pants that cost $40, a pressed blue button-down shirt from Old Navy that cost $25, and the same $120 navy blazer from Kohl's that Nyla had once called cheap. He wanted her to see exactly the man she thought she was divorcing. He arrived at 9:45 a.m. and met Deidre in the lobby. She was a vision of corporate power in a charcoal gray Armani suit that likely cost $3,000. She carried a sleek black leather briefcase. She gave him a small, reassuring nod. "Ready?" "As I'll ever be," he said. They entered the conference room. It was a sterile, impersonal space with a long mahogany table, 12 chairs, and a large window overlooking the downtown skyline. Nyla and her lawyer, Eleanor, were already seated. Nyla looked incredible. She wore a cream-colored Chanel-style suit that screamed money and success, probably a $3,500 ensemble. Her hair was perfect, her makeup flawless. She looked every bit the part of the sophisticated woman on the verge of her new, elevated life. She gave Lance a dismissive glance, a look that said, "Look at you, still the same." Eleanor, a woman with a shark-like smile, gave Deidre a condescending nod. "Deidre, glad you could make it. Shall we get this over with quickly? My client is a very busy woman." "Of course," Deidre said smoothly, taking her seat opposite them. "Efficiency is always the goal." The mediator, a retired judge, began the proceedings. "All right, we're here for the initial disclosure and to see if we can find some common ground. Ms. Vance, I assume you've received Ms. Clark's client's disclosure." "We have," Eleanor said, gesturing to a thin folder on the table. "As you can see, it's a very simple estate, a primary residence, one vehicle of note, some savings, and a 401k. We've proposed a fair and equitable split." She slid the folder across the table. It detailed their estimated marital estate of $410,000. The mediator nodded and turned to Deidre. "Ms. Vance, your client's disclosure?" This was the moment. Lance felt his heart beat a steady, slow rhythm in his chest. He watched Deidre reach into her briefcase and pull out not a thin folder, but a thick, spiral-bound document over 200 pages long. She placed it on the table with a soft but decisive thud. The sound seemed to echo in the silent room. She slid one copy to the mediator and another across the polished table to Eleanor and Nyla. "Here is Mr. Jackson's financial disclosure," Deidre said, her voice calm and even. "Fully compliant with all state requirements." Eleanor picked it up, a slight frown on her face, clearly annoyed by the unnecessary volume of paper. Nyla leaned over her shoulder, a look of bored impatience on her face. The first page was a simple summary sheet. Lance knew what it said. He had stared at it for hours. Financial disclosure, Lance M. Jackson, summary of assets and liabilities. Section A, marital property, property acquired during the marriage via joint funds. Brookside residence, equity, $120,000 joint savings account, 18,214.9 401k, marital portion, $42,100 2022 Lexus RX 350, equity, $19,500 total marital estate, 19842 Tour Section B, sole and separate property, property acquired prior to marriage or with funds from premarital assets held in separate legal entities, Lancer Properties, LLC, portfolio value, $12,745,000 LMJ Holdings, Inc., portfolio value, $21,350,000 various brokerage accounts, premarital, 6,092, 234.19. Total separate estate, 4,117 to 34.19, combined net worth, 43,1758, tier 19. Lance watched Nyla's eyes scan the page. He saw the exact moment she processed the numbers, her brow furrowed in confusion. She blinked, then blinked again as if the words were a misprint. He saw her mouth the number under her breath, 40 million? Her head snapped up, her eyes locking on him. The look was not of joy or surprise. It was one of pure, unadulterated shock, quickly followed by a dawning, sickening horror. Her face, so carefully composed moments before, went completely white. The color drained from her cheeks, leaving her flawless makeup looking like a painted mask on a statue. Eleanor, her shark-like smile vanished, was flipping through the pages, her expression turning from disbelief to professional panic. She was seeing the evidence. Deeds, LLC formation documents, bank statements, all dated years before the marriage. "What is this?" Nyla whispered, her voice a strangled sound. She pointed a trembling finger at the document. "What is this joke?" "It's no joke, Nyla," Deidre said, her voice cutting through the tension. "It's my client's financial disclosure, meticulously documented, as you can see." Nyla turned her gaze back to Lance. The mask of the sophisticated, powerful woman was gone. In its place was raw, naked bewilderment and a fury so intense it seemed to vibrate in the air. She was staring at the simple man in the cheap blazer, the man who put steering wheels on trucks, and seeing a complete and total stranger. A stranger who was worth $40 million. And she had just called him not enough before filing to divorce him. The full weight of her catastrophic mistake was just beginning to land. The conference room, once a stage for Nyla's presumed victory, became a courtroom of silent, stunned horror for her. Her lawyer, Eleanor, was the first to recover, attempting to regain control through aggression. "This is an outrage," she declared, her voice a little too loud for the room. An obvious attempt to hide marital assets, and then introduce them at the last minute as separate property. "We will contest this, Your Honor," she said, turning to the mediator. "We will demand a full forensic accounting. There is no way a man on a $58,000 salary could accumulate this kind of wealth without commingling marital funds." Deidre Vance remained perfectly still. She let Eleanor finish her tirade, then calmly turned to the tabbed sections in her copy of the disclosure. "If you'll direct your attention to Appendix C, Ms. Clark," Deidre said, her tone as cool and smooth as the glass on her desk back at the office. "You will find a complete flow of funds analysis for the past 10 years, prepared by a certified forensic accountant. It shows with indisputable clarity that not one single dollar from Mr. Jackson's W-2 employment with the Ford Motor Company was ever used for any investment, property tax payment, or maintenance on any of the assets listed in Section B." She paused, letting the weight of that statement settle. "Conversely, you'll see that every penny of Mr. Jackson's salary, minus his 401k contributions, was deposited directly into the joint marital account, from which all household expenses, including the mortgage, the $600 monthly payment on your client's Lexus, and her not insignificant personal spending, were paid." Nyla was just staring at Lance, her mouth slightly agape. "You lied to me," she breathed, the accusation hanging in the air. "For 5 years, you lied to me." Lance finally spoke, his voice quiet but firm, carrying across the table with devastating force. "No, Nyla. I never lied. You never asked." His words hit her harder than any shout could have. It was the truth. She had been so certain of his simplicity, so wrapped up in her own assumptions, that she had never once asked about his financial life beyond the paycheck she saw. She had never shown any curiosity about the hours he spent in his home office, the books on tax law on his nightstand, or the business mail that came to his P.O. box. She saw what she wanted to see, a simple man who would never be enough. The mediator, a man who had seen hundreds of contentious divorces, was now engrossed in Lance's disclosure. He flipped through the appendices, his eyebrows rising slightly. He saw the copies of the journal pages, the neat handwritten entries cross-referenced with bank statements and deeds. It was the most comprehensive and organized presentation of separate property he had ever witnessed. "The source of the initial capital?" the mediator asked, looking at Deidre. "An inheritance from my client's grandfather in 2004, a full 6 years before he met Ms. Brooks," Deidre stated. "The documentation is in Appendix A." The legal battle that Eleanor had threatened was over before it began. The evidence was too perfect, too overwhelming. The firewall Lance had built between his two lives, the life of the factory worker and the life of the investor, was absolute. The proceedings moved from the mediation firm to an actual courtroom for a judge to rule on the separate property claim. The scene repeated itself, but this time with the gravitas of a formal judicial setting. Eleanor argued passionately, but she had no evidence, only speculation and outrage. Deidre, in contrast, presented a calm, logical case built on a mountain of irrefutable paperwork. She called the forensic accountant to the stand, who explained the pristine separation of funds in simple, direct terms. The judge, a no-nonsense woman named Judge Carol Warren, listened patiently. After 2 days of hearings, she was ready to make her ruling. "I have reviewed the extensive documentation provided by the respondent, Mr. Jackson," Judge Warren announced, looking down from the bench. "In my 15 years in family court, I have never seen a more thorough or convincing claim of separate property. The level of record-keeping is, frankly, extraordinary." She looked directly at Nyla and Eleanor. "The petitioner's claim that these assets must be commingled is based on nothing more than incredulity. The evidence shows a clear and unbroken chain of separation. Therefore, this court rules that the entire portfolio of assets listed in Section B of the respondent's disclosure, valued at approximately $40 million, is the sole and separate property of Mr. Jackson and is not subject to division in this divorce." A gasp was heard from Nyla's side of the courtroom. The gavel fell with a sharp crack, sealing her fate. The judge continued, her voice clinical. "The court will now address the division of the marital estate, valued at $199,814. She walked through the numbers. The house would be sold, and the $120,000 in equity would be split. The $18,214 in savings would be split. The marital portion of the 401k, $42,100, would be split. After the division of these assets," the judge concluded, "Ms. Brooks will receive a settlement of approximately $99,907. Regarding the petition for spousal support, given the short duration of the marriage and the substantial assets Mr. Jackson voluntarily contributed to the marital lifestyle from his salary, the request for spousal support is denied." Another crack of the gavel. It was over. Nyla sat frozen, her face a mask of disbelief. $99,000. From an estate she had just learned was worth $40 million. It was less than the cost of 2 years of payments on her Lexus. It was a rounding error in the world she had just discovered existed right under her nose. As the court adjourned, she finally turned on Lance, her eyes blazing with a desperate, wild fury. "You did this to me," she hissed, her voice low and venomous. "You set me up. You humiliated me." Lance looked at her, and for the first time, he felt nothing. No anger, no love, no pity. Just a vast, empty space where his marriage used to be. "No, Nyla," he said, repeating the devastating truth. "You did this to yourself." He turned and walked away, leaving her standing in the ruins of her own greed. The consequences of Nyla's miscalculation cascaded through her life with brutal efficiency. The downfall she had planned for Lance, a gentle slide into a bachelor apartment, was nothing compared to the freefall she now experienced. First came the legal bill from Eleanor Clark. Her services, which included the failed court battle and the hiring of her own hastily assembled forensic accountant, came to a staggering $78,000. After paying her lawyer, Nyla's settlement of just under $100,000 was reduced to a mere $21,907. It was barely enough to cover a security deposit and first month's rent on a decent apartment. The Brookside house, the symbol of her starter life, was sold within a month. The day of the closing, she had to be out. Lance had already removed his few possessions. She stood alone in the empty rooms, the echo of her ambitions mocking her. The 4,500 granite countertops seemed cold and cheap. She had fought for a house, and now she had nowhere to go. She was forced to rent a cramped 700-square-foot apartment in a dated complex in Raytown, a far cry from the country club plaza loft she had dreamed of. Her monthly rent was $1,150. The walls were thin, and she could hear her neighbors arguing at all hours. The luxury she had craved was replaced by the reality of cracked linoleum and a temperamental air conditioning unit. Next went the car. Without Lance's income subsidizing the $600 monthly payment and the exorbitant insurance, she couldn't afford the Lexus RX 350. She tried to sell it, but because she had bought it new with minimal money down, she was upside down on the loan. She ended up having to write a check for $4,000 just to get rid of it, selling it back to the dealership for a massive loss. She bought a 10-year-old Honda Civic for $8,000, a car that felt like a constant, rolling symbol of her failure. Her social life evaporated. The wealthy friends she had cultivated, the women whose husbands ran the city, heard the story. Divorce was common in their circle, but this story was different. It was a tale of spectacular misjudgment. Nyla wasn't a wronged wife, she was a punchline. The woman who had left a secret millionaire. The pity and gossip were unbearable. Invitations to brunch and charity galas stopped coming. Her phone went silent. Reality hit its hardest when she had to find a job. The career she put on hold had been a part-time administrative position she'd left 7 years ago. Her skills were outdated, her resume thin. After dozens of rejections, she finally found work as a receptionist at a dental office, earning $17 an hour. Her gross monthly income was now less than what she used to spend on clothes and salon visits. Lance, meanwhile, received a series of voicemails from her, each one a snapshot of her emotional collapse. The first, left the day after the judgment, was pure rage. "How could you do this to me, you monster? You let me believe we were struggling. You enjoyed watching me worry about money. You are a sick, twisted man." The second, a week later, was pleading. "Lance, please, we can fix this. I made a mistake. A terrible mistake. I was just stressed. I didn't mean it. We can go to counseling. Just call me, please." The third, after she moved into her apartment, was tearful despair. "I'm living in this horrible place. Do you know what it's like? I have nothing. Everything I worked for is gone. You took everything from me." The fourth and final voicemail came late one night, about a month after the divorce was finalized. Her voice was flat, empty of all emotion. "You were right. I never asked. I never looked at you, did I? I just looked right through you. I hope you're happy. I hope you and your $40 million are very, very happy." He never responded to any of them. He didn't feel triumph, only a deep, somber sense of an ending. He had closed a chapter of his life, a chapter that had been built on a false foundation. Nyla hadn't lost everything. She had only lost access to what was never hers. The life she was living now was the one she had earned all by herself. 1 year later, on a bright Saturday morning in May, Lance stood in the community room of a repurposed warehouse in the West Bottoms. The air smelled of fresh coffee and possibility. The sun streamed through the large industrial windows, illuminating the faces of the 24 people gathered before him. They were men and women like him. Their hands were calloused, their faces etched with the fatigue of shift work. They were welders, mechanics, line workers, and electricians from the Clay Como plant and other factories around the city. He was dressed simply, in jeans and a polo shirt. There was no trace of the $40 million man, only the quiet confidence of a teacher. This was the inaugural meeting of the Clay Como Capital Co-op, an investment club and financial literacy initiative he had founded. He had seeded it with $1 million of his own money, an amount that was now being used to provide low-interest loans for down payments and to create a shared investment fund. "Good morning," Lance began, his voice calm and clear. "My name is Lance Jackson, and for the last 19 years, I've worked on the assembly line at the Ford plant. I'm one of you." He spent the next hour telling them his story, not the story of his divorce, but the story of his financial journey. He told them about his grandfather's $75,000 inheritance and the fear he felt holding that check, terrified of wasting the only head start he would ever get. He told them about buying that first duplex, about teaching himself how to screen tenants, how to fix a leaky pipe at 2 a.m., how to read a balance sheet. He didn't use fancy terms, he spoke their language. He compared leveraging equity in a property to using a pry bar to lift something heavy. He talked about compound interest being like the first few turns of a bolt. It's slow at first, but then it gains momentum and becomes unstoppable. He put up a slide showing the first journal entry from 2004. "This is where it started," he said, "not with a grand vision, but with one small step. I wrote everything down. I tracked every dollar. I learned the rules of the game. The game is designed to make you think it's too complicated, that you need a special degree or a fancy suit to play. That is a lie." He looked out at the crowd. He saw skepticism, but he also saw flickers of hope. He saw a young woman with braids, a single mother who worked the night shift, furiously taking notes. He saw an older man, his face a roadmap of a long life of hard labor, lean forward, his expression intense. "Wealth isn't about a new car or a big house," Lance told them, his voice filled with a passion Nyla had never heard. "Those things are just bills. Real wealth is freedom. It's the freedom to not be afraid when the overtime hours get cut. It's the freedom to pay for your kids' college education without crippling debt. It's the freedom to retire with dignity, not just scrape by. It's the freedom to say no to a life that doesn't serve you." After the presentation, he was surrounded. The questions came in a flood, not about getting rich quick, but about the practical, step-by-step process. How do you start an LLC? What's the best way to save for a down payment on a salary like ours? How do you deal with bad tenants? He stayed for 3 hours, answering every question, his heart full in a way it had never been with Nyla. This was his purpose, not the money itself, but what the money could do. It could build communities, empower people, and rewrite the stories of families for generations to come. He thought of Nyla's final voicemail. "I hope you and your $40 million are very, very happy." He was happy, but the money was just a tool. His happiness came from this, from the quiet satisfaction of building something real and lasting, not for himself, but with others. True wealth, he now understood, wasn't a number in a bank account. It was the richness of a life lived with purpose, integrity, and a commitment to lifting up the community that you came from. He had always been enough for himself. Now he was finally in a place where he could be enough for others, too. And that was a fortune no one could ever take away. Every one of us has a hidden strength, a secret power that others might underestimate. What's yours? Share your story in the comments, and let's celebrate the amazing power we all hold inside.